Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a proactive, intelligence-driven approach to cargo screening is more efficient than reactive measures. As a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer stationed at the Port of Los Angeles, you are reviewing an incoming container shipment. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of effective risk assessment and the efficient facilitation of lawful trade? Option A. Immediately initiate a full physical inspection of the container because the importer has a high volume of shipments passing through the port annually. Option B. Review the manifest, bill of lading, and any pre-arrival data, considering the importer's compliance history, commodity, country of origin, and any relevant intelligence before deciding on the level of examination. Option C. Release the shipment without further scrutiny, assuming that most goods entering the United States are compliant and the importer has a generally good record. Option D. Conduct a cursory visual inspection of the container's exterior for any obvious signs of tampering before allowing it to proceed. Correct answer is B. Review the manifest, bill of lading, and any pre-arrival data, considering the importer's compliance history, commodity, country of origin, and any relevant intelligence before deciding on the level of examination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of national security and revenue collection with the efficient facilitation of legitimate trade. Misjudging the risk associated with a shipment can lead to either unnecessary delays and economic impact for compliant importers, or, conversely, the potential entry of prohibited goods or undeclared revenue. The officer must exercise sound judgment based on available information and established protocols. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic risk assessment that prioritizes intelligence-driven analysis and the examination of specific indicators. This approach begins with reviewing the manifest, bill of lading, and any pre-arrival information provided by the importer or carrier. The officer should then consider the importer's compliance history, the commodity type, the country of origin, and any known intelligence or alerts related to the shipment or the parties involved. If these initial steps reveal anomalies or elevated risk factors, the officer should then proceed to a more intensive examination, which could include document review, physical inspection, or referral to specialized units. This method aligns with CBP's mandate to secure borders and facilitate lawful trade by focusing resources on high-risk shipments while minimizing disruption to legitimate commerce. It is ethically and regulatorily sound, as it adheres to the principles of due diligence and proportionate response. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the volume of trade or the perceived reputation of the importer without a thorough review of the specific shipment's details. This fails to account for the possibility of a single non-compliant shipment from an otherwise reputable entity or a change in the nature of goods being imported. It bypasses critical risk indicators and could lead to the undetected entry of illicit goods. Another incorrect approach is to immediately escalate to a full physical inspection of every shipment from a particular country or for a specific commodity, regardless of other risk factors. This is inefficient and resource-intensive, diverting attention from potentially higher-risk shipments elsewhere. It does not demonstrate a nuanced understanding of risk assessment and can create unnecessary bottlenecks in trade flow, contrary to CBP's facilitation goals. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss a shipment based on a minor, easily explainable discrepancy without further investigation. This could be a simple clerical error that, if overlooked, might lead to the rejection of legitimate goods or a missed opportunity to gather intelligence on a more significant issue. It lacks the thoroughness required for effective risk management. Professional reasoning. CBP officers should employ a tiered risk assessment framework. This involves initial screening based on available data and intelligence. If the initial screening indicates a low risk, the shipment may be released. If moderate risk factors are present, further document review or targeted questioning may be warranted. High-risk indicators necessitate more intensive examinations, including physical inspection. This systematic process ensures that resources are allocated effectively and that both security and trade facilitation objectives are met. Question 2. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the volume of imported goods processed at U.S. ports of entry, necessitating an efficient yet effective approach to cargo screening. Considering the U.S. Customs and Border Protection's mandate to secure the nation's borders while facilitating lawful trade, Which of the following strategies best balances these competing priorities for U.S. CBP officers? Option A. Accepting all importer declarations at face value without independent verification or risk-based analysis. Option B. Implementing a multi-layered risk assessment strategy that leverages intelligence, historical data, and observable indicators to prioritize inspections of high-risk shipments. Option C. Performing only superficial visual inspections of every shipment to expedite processing and minimize delays. Option D. Conducting random, non-targeted inspections of a predetermined percentage of all incoming cargo to ensure broad coverage. Correct answer is B. Implementing a multi-layered risk assessment strategy that leverages intelligence, historical data, and observable indicators to prioritize inspections of high-risk shipments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) officer by requiring them to balance the imperative of facilitating legitimate trade with the critical need to identify and interdict illicit goods. The volume of trade processed daily at U.S. ports of entry, coupled with the dynamic nature of smuggling methods, necessitates a sophisticated risk assessment approach. Overly aggressive screening can impede commerce and strain resources, while insufficient scrutiny can allow dangerous or prohibited items to enter the United States, posing risks to national security, public health, and economic integrity. Therefore, careful judgment is required to optimize resource allocation and effectiveness. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves employing a multi-layered risk assessment strategy that prioritizes resources based on intelligence, historical data, and observable indicators. This approach leverages advanced targeting systems, information sharing with other agencies, and the officer's professional judgment to identify shipments with a higher probability of containing contraband or violating U.S. laws and regulation. By focusing scrutiny on high-risk shipments, CBP can more effectively interdict threats while allowing low-risk, legitimate trade to proceed with minimal delay. This aligns with CBP's mission to secure U.S. borders while facilitating lawful international commerce, as outlined in various CBP directives and operational guidelines that emphasize intelligence-driven enforcement and risk management. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on random selection for inspection. This method is inefficient and ineffective as it does not target specific threats or patterns of illicit activity. It expends valuable resources on shipments that are likely legitimate, diverting attention from potentially higher-risk cargo. This approach fails to adhere to the principles of risk management and intelligence-led operations that are fundamental to modern border security. Another incorrect approach is to conduct cursory inspections of all shipments, regardless of risk factors. While seemingly thorough, this method is unsustainable given the sheer volume of trade. It leads to significant delays for legitimate businesses, negatively impacts the flow of commerce, and is unlikely to detect sophisticated smuggling attempts. This approach neglects the strategic allocation of resources and the importance of focusing on credible indicators of risk. A further incorrect approach is to solely rely on the declarations made by importers without any independent verification or risk assessment. Importers may intentionally or unintentionally misrepresent the contents of their shipments. Without a risk-based verification process, CBP would be susceptible to deception, allowing prohibited or controlled substances to enter the country undetected. This directly contravenes CBP's mandate to enforce U.S. laws and regulations at the border. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the operational context and available intelligence. They should then evaluate potential approaches against CBP's strategic objectives, which include both security and facilitation. The process involves identifying the risks associated with each approach, considering the potential impact on trade, and assessing the likelihood of success in interdicting illicit goods. Ultimately, the decision should be guided by a commitment to upholding CBP's mission and adhering to established protocols for risk management and enforcement. Question 3. During the evaluation of an incoming shipment of electronics at a U.S. port of entry, a CBP officer notes that the manifest lists a large quantity of high-value items from a shipper with a generally good compliance record. However, the declared value appears unusually low for the volume and type of goods. What is the most prudent course of action for the CBP officer to take in this specific scenario, adhering to U.S. U.S. Customs and Border Protection's operational framework. Option A. Prioritize the rapid processing of the shipment to maintain efficient trade flow, and only flag it for further inspection if specific intelligence directly implicates this particular shipment in illicit activity. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of all available pre-arrival intelligence and manifest details, and perform a physical inspection of the cargo, looking for discrepancies that align with known smuggling methods or undervaluation schemes. Option C. Immediately clear the shipment based on the shipper's generally good compliance record, assuming the low declared value is a legitimate business practice or a minor clerical error. Option D. Focus solely on the large volume of goods and the low declared value, initiating a detailed financial audit of the shipper's past transactions without physically inspecting the cargo. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of all available pre-arrival intelligence and manifest details, and perform a physical inspection of the cargo, looking for discrepancies that align with known smuggling methods or undervaluation schemes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of facilitating legitimate trade with the critical need to identify and interdict illicit goods. The officer must make a swift, informed decision based on limited information, understanding that both over-scrutiny and under-scrutiny carry significant consequences. The volume of trade passing through U.S. ports of entry necessitates efficient processing, but the potential harm from prohibited items demands vigilance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted risk assessment that prioritizes intelligence-driven analysis and observable indicators. This approach begins with a thorough review of all available pre-arrival information, including manifest details, shipper/consignee history, and any flagged intelligence. It then integrates this with a visual inspection of the cargo and conveyance, looking for discrepancies, unusual packaging, or other anomalies that align with known smuggling methods. This method is correct because it directly aligns with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's mandate to secure U.S. borders and facilitate lawful trade by leveraging data and direct observation to identify high-risk shipments for further inspection, thereby optimizing resource allocation and maximizing interdiction effectiveness. It adheres to CBP's operational directives that emphasize risk management principles. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the volume of goods without considering the nature of the shipment or the parties involved is a flawed approach. This overlooks the possibility that even small quantities of certain goods can pose significant risks, and it fails to leverage intelligence that might highlight specific trade lanes or entities as higher risk. Relying exclusively on the shipper's reputation without verifying the manifest details is also problematic. A reputable shipper could be unknowingly exploited by illicit actors, or their information could be compromised. This approach neglects the critical step of verifying the accuracy and completeness of the declared information against observable evidence. Prioritizing speed of processing above all else, even when suspicious indicators are present, directly contravenes CBP's mission to interdict contraband and protect national security. This approach would lead to the potential facilitation of illegal activities. Professional reasoning. CBP officers should employ a systematic risk assessment framework. This involves 1. Information gathering, actively seeking and analyzing all available data, including intelligence reports, historical shipment data, and manifest information. 2. Threat identification, recognizing patterns and indicators associated with illicit activities, such as inconsistencies in documentation, unusual routing, or known high-risk commodities. 3. Risk evaluation, assigning a risk level to the shipment based on the gathered information and identified threats. 4. Targeted intervention, implementing appropriate inspection or examination strategies based on the assessed risk level, ensuring that resources are focused on the highest risk shipments. This structured approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, consistent, and aligned with CBP's strategic objectives. Question 4. What factors should a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer prioritize when conducting a risk assessment for an incoming shipment from Canada to determine the appropriate level of inspection? Option A. The absence of any prior alerts or flags associated with the specific carrier transporting the goods. Option B. The fact that the importer has a history of timely payments for duties and taxes. Option C. A thorough review of the cargo manifest, shipper and consignee intelligence, and any observable discrepancies between the declared goods and the nature of the shipment. Option D. The perceived low monetary value of the goods as declared on the invoice. Correct answer is C. A thorough review of the cargo manifest, shipper and consignee intelligence, and any observable discrepancies between the declared goods and the nature of the shipment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a CBP officer must balance the imperative to facilitate legitimate trade with the equally critical duty to prevent the illicit entry of prohibited items. The officer's judgment directly impacts national security, economic integrity, and the efficiency of international commerce. A hasty or overly lenient decision can have severe consequences, while an overly aggressive approach can impede lawful trade and damage international relations. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes intelligence, cargo manifests, and observable anomalies. This method is correct because it aligns with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's CBP mandate to secure U.S. borders while facilitating lawful trade. By systematically evaluating available information, including the shipper's history, the nature of the goods, and any discrepancies in documentation, the officer can make an informed decision about the level of inspection required. This aligns with CBP's strategic objectives of identifying and mitigating threats through data-driven analysis and targeted enforcement. An approach that solely relies on the perceived low value of the shipment is incorrect. This fails to acknowledge that even low-value shipments can be used to conceal high-risk contraband or be part of a larger smuggling operation. It bypasses the systematic risk assessment process mandated by CBP regulations, which requires consideration of multiple factors beyond mere monetary value. Another incorrect approach is to immediately escalate to a full physical inspection based on a minor, easily explainable discrepancy. While vigilance is crucial, an immediate escalation without further analysis can be inefficient and may unnecessarily delay legitimate commerce. CBP guidelines emphasize a tiered approach to inspection, starting with document review and intelligence-based targeting before resorting to more intrusive methods, unless immediate indicators of severe risk are present. Finally, an approach that dismisses the shipment because the importer is a known entity is also flawed. While a known importer might have a history of compliance, this does not grant immunity from scrutiny. CBP's risk assessment framework requires continuous evaluation, as even compliant entities can be exploited or inadvertently involved in illicit activities. Relying solely on past compliance without considering the current shipment specifics is a failure to adhere to dynamic risk management principles. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory environment and CBP's mission. This involves gathering all available data, cross-referencing information, identifying potential red flags based on established risk indicators, and then applying a tiered inspection strategy. When in doubt, consulting with supervisors or specialized units is a critical step in ensuring compliance and making sound, defensible decisions. Question 5. The risk matrix shows a traveler presenting a valid U.S. visa and a clear customs declaration form, but exhibiting subtle signs of anxiety and having a travel history that includes frequent short trips to a country known for illicit cross-border activities. As a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer in California, which approach best aligns with the principles of risk assessment and operational directives for ensuring border security. Option A. Conduct a thorough secondary inspection, focusing on the traveler's stated purpose of visit and cross-referencing their travel history with intelligence databases to assess the aggregated risk factors. Option B. Focus exclusively on the traveler's frequent trips to the country of concern, initiating a full search of their belongings without further consideration of their declaration or visa status. Option C. Detain the traveler based solely on their apparent nervousness, as this is a strong indicator of potential illicit activity. Option D. Immediately allow the traveler to enter the United States, as their documentation is in order and their demeanor, while anxious, is not a definitive indicator of wrongdoing. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough secondary inspection, focusing on the traveler's stated purpose of visit and cross-referencing their travel history with intelligence databases to assess the aggregated risk factors. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of national security and border integrity with the efficient flow of legitimate trade and travel. Misinterpreting risk indicators can lead to either unnecessary delays for compliant individuals and goods, or, more critically, the potential for illicit items or individuals to enter the United States undetected. The officer must exercise sound judgment based on available intelligence and established protocols, rather than succumbing to personal bias or external pressure. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic and objective evaluation of all available risk indicators, cross-referencing them with established CBP intelligence and operational directives. This means considering the traveler's declared purpose of travel, their travel history, any alerts flagged in the system, and observable behaviors or inconsistencies. The officer must then apply their training and experience to determine if the aggregated risk factors warrant further inspection or questioning, adhering strictly to the principles of risk-based targeting as mandated by CBP policy. This methodical process ensures that resources are focused where the risk is highest, while minimizing disruption to legitimate commerce and travel, and upholding the legal framework governing border operations in the United States. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely focus on the traveler's demeanor, such as nervousness, as the primary indicator of risk. While demeanor can be a factor, it is not a definitive predictor of illicit activity and can be influenced by many innocent reasons, such as unfamiliarity with U.S. customs procedures or language barriers. Relying heavily on this can lead to profiling and discrimination, which is contrary to CBP's ethical guidelines and operational directives that emphasize objective risk assessment. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss all risk indicators if the traveler appears outwardly compliant and cooperative. This overlooks the possibility that sophisticated individuals or criminal organizations may deliberately present a facade of normalcy to circumvent scrutiny. CBP's mission requires vigilance against all potential threats, and a passive approach that ignores multiple, albeit subtle, risk factors would be a failure to uphold this duty. A third incorrect approach is to allow personal biases or preconceived notions about a particular nationality or group to influence the assessment of risk. This is a direct violation of CBP's commitment to fair and impartial enforcement and can lead to discriminatory practices. Risk assessment must be based on objective data and intelligence, not on stereotypes or personal prejudices. Professional reasoning. A CBP officer should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the mission objectives, securing the border while facilitating lawful trade and travel. They should then gather all available information, systematically assess it against established risk criteria and intelligence, and consult relevant directives and protocols. If uncertainty remains, seeking guidance from a supervisor or utilizing available CBP resources for further analysis is a critical step. This ensures decisions are defensible, consistent with legal and ethical standards, and contribute to the overall effectiveness of border security operations in the United States. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that a particular shipping lane from Mexico to Texas has seen a recent increase in the volume of textile imports. A CBP officer is reviewing an incoming shipment of clothing from a new importer with a moderate volume of trade. The manifest appears complete, and the commodity is generally considered low risk. What is the most prudent approach for the CBP officer to take in assessing this shipment for potential security risks? Option A. Rely primarily on the importer's demeanor during any potential interaction, and the fact that the commodity is generally considered low risk to expedite the clearance process. Option B. Focus solely on the commodity type, assuming that since it is generally low risk, the shipment poses minimal threat and can be cleared without further scrutiny. Option C. Immediately flag the shipment for a full physical inspection due to the recent increase in textile imports on the shipping lane, regardless of the importer's history or the commodity's general risk classification. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of available intelligence on the importer and origin country. Meticulously examine the manifest and supporting documentation for any anomalies, and consider the commodity's risk profile in conjunction with these factors before deciding on further inspection. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of available intelligence on the importer and origin country. Meticulously examine the manifest and supporting documentation for any anomalies, and consider the commodity's risk profile in conjunction with these factors before deciding on further inspection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) officer because it requires balancing the imperative to facilitate legitimate trade with the critical need to identify and interdict illicit goods. The officer must make a judgment call based on limited information, where a miscalculation could lead to either a security breach or unnecessary delays for a compliant importer. The pressure to perform efficiently while maintaining vigilance necessitates a systematic and evidence-based approach to risk assessment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes intelligence-driven analysis and observable indicators. This approach begins with reviewing available intelligence regarding the importer, the commodity, and the origin country for any known patterns of illicit activity or elevated risk profiles. Concurrently, the officer must meticulously examine the manifest and supporting documentation for any inconsistencies, anomalies, or red flags that deviate from standard import procedures. This dual focus on pre-arrival intelligence and real-time documentation review allows for more informed decision on whether to escalate inspection. This aligns with CBP's mandate to secure U.S. borders while facilitating lawful commerce, as outlined in CBP's strategic goals and operational directives, which emphasize intelligence-led enforcement and risk management. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the importer's perceived demeanor or the volume of trade is professionally unacceptable. A perceived nervous demeanor is subjective and not a reliable indicator of illicit activity. It can stem from many factors unrelated to smuggling and can lead to discriminatory profiling. Similarly, a high volume of trade does not inherently signify risk. It can simply indicate a successful and legitimate business operation. Focusing only on the commodity type without considering the importer's history or origin country's risk profile is also insufficient. Certain commodities may be high risk, but if imported by a trusted entity with a clean record from a low-risk origin, the risk may be mitigated. Conversely, a seemingly low-risk commodity could be used to conceal illicit items if imported by a suspect entity or from a high-risk region. These approaches fail to employ a systematic, evidence-based risk assessment methodology, potentially leading to either missed threats or unwarranted scrutiny. Professional reasoning. CBP officers should employ a structured decision-making process that integrates multiple layers of risk assessment. This process begins with leveraging pre-arrival intelligence and risk profiling. It then moves to a thorough examination of all submitted documentation for accuracy and completeness. Observable indicators during the inspection process, such as discrepancies between declared and actual goods or unusual packaging, should be considered as secondary factors that corroborate or refute initial risk assessments. This multifaceted approach ensures that resources are deployed effectively to address the highest risks while minimizing disruption to legitimate trade, in accordance with CBP's mission and regulatory framework. Question 7. The assessment process reveals a shipment of electronics declared as consumer-grade audio equipment arriving at a port of entry in California. The manifest appears complete, and the importing company has a history of compliant shipments. However, the officer notices a slight inconsistency in the labeling on one of the cartons, which appears to be a different font than the others, though the product name is identical. Considering the principles of risk assessment in U.S. Customs and Border Protection operations, which of the following actions best reflects professional judgment and adherence to regulatory requirements? Option A. Initiate a full, intrusive search of all cartons in the shipment due to the labeling inconsistency, regardless of other factors. Option B. Conduct a targeted inspection of the inconsistent carton, comparing the contents against the manifest, and looking for any other subtle indicators of misdeclaration or prohibited items, while allowing the rest of the shipment to proceed if other factors remain compliant. Option C. Detain the entire shipment and refer it for a lengthy secondary inspection based on the single, minor labeling anomaly, without considering the company's compliance history or the nature of the discrepancy. Option D. Immediately release the entire shipment without further inspection, assuming the minor labeling difference is a clerical error and the company's history indicates no risk. The correct answer is B. Conduct a targeted inspection of the inconsistent carton, comparing the contents against the manifest, and looking for any other subtle indicators of misdeclaration or prohibited items, while allowing the rest of the shipment to proceed if other factors remain compliant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of facilitating legitimate trade with the critical duty of identifying and interdicting illicit goods. The officer must make a swift, informed judgment based on limited information, where a wrong decision could either impede commerce or allow contraband to enter the United States. The pressure to maintain efficiency at the border, coupled with the responsibility for national security and public safety, necessitates a rigorous and principled approach to risk assessment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic evaluation of all available indicators, prioritizing observable facts and documented information over assumptions or generalized suspicions. This approach aligns with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's (CBP) mandate to secure the nation's borders while facilitating lawful trade. Specifically, it requires the officer to meticulously review the manifest, compare it against the physical goods, and scrutinize the declared contents for any discrepancies or anomalies that warrant further investigation. This methodical process, grounded in established CBP procedures and risk management principles, ensures that decisions are data-driven and defensible, minimizing the likelihood of both false positives and missed threats. The focus remains on verifiable information and adherence to established protocols for cargo inspection and risk assessment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on the perceived volume of trade or the reputation of the importing company to bypass thorough inspection. This fails to acknowledge that even high-volume traders or established companies can be used as conduits for illicit activities. It bypasses the fundamental risk assessment process mandated by CBP, which requires individualized scrutiny of shipments. Another incorrect approach is to immediately escalate to a full, intrusive search based on a minor, easily explainable discrepancy, such as a slight variation in packaging material that is common for that specific type of commodity. This approach is inefficient, wastes valuable resources, and can negatively impact legitimate trade by causing unnecessary delays. It demonstrates a lack of nuanced judgment and an inability to differentiate between minor deviations and genuine indicators of risk. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss a shipment based on a vague, unsubstantiated suspicion or a generalized feeling that something is off, without any concrete evidence or observable indicators. This is unprofessional and contrary to the principles of evidence-based decision-making. CBP officers are trained to identify specific risk factors and indicators, not to act on intuition alone, which can lead to discriminatory practices and unwarranted disruptions to trade. Professional reasoning. CBP officers must employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the declared information and the nature of the goods. They should then systematically compare this with observable physical characteristics and any available intelligence. When discrepancies or anomalies are identified, the officer must assess their significance based on established risk factors and CBP guidelines. This assessment should guide the decision on whether to proceed with further inspection, questioning, or release of the shipment. The process emphasizes objectivity, adherence to procedure, and the judicious use of resources to effectively manage risk at the border. Question 8. The assessment process reveals a traveler arriving at a U.S. port of entry who exhibits some signs of nervousness, is traveling alone, and has no items to declare. Considering the principles of risk assessment in U.S. Customs and Border Protection operations, which of the following actions best reflects a professional and compliant response? Option A. Conduct a brief, professional interview to confirm travel purpose and verify information, while observing demeanor and any subtle cues before making a decision on further inspection. Option B. Escalate the traveler for secondary inspection solely based on their solitary travel status and lack of declared items. Option C. Allow the traveler to proceed without any further interaction, assuming they are a legitimate tourist with nothing to declare. Option D. Immediately subject the traveler to a full, intrusive baggage and personal search due to their perceived nervousness. The correct answer is A. Conduct a brief, professional interview to confirm travel purpose and verify information, while observing demeanor and any subtle cues before making a decision on further inspection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of national security and border integrity with the need for efficient and fair processing of travelers. The officer must make a swift, informed decision based on limited information, recognizing that an incorrect assessment could lead to either a security breach or unnecessary delays and inconvenience for legitimate travelers. The officer's judgment is critical in identifying potential risks without resorting to prejudice or overreach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and objective assessment of all available information, prioritizing observable indicators and documented evidence over assumptions or generalizations. This approach aligns with U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) directives that emphasize risk-based targeting and thorough, yet efficient, inspections. Specifically, it requires the officer to consider the traveler's demeanor, travel history, declared goods, and any intelligence or alerts associated with their entry. This methodical process ensures that resources are focused on genuine threats while minimizing disruption to lawful commerce and travel, adhering to the principles of due process and equal protection under U.S. law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately escalating scrutiny based solely on the traveler's perceived nervousness. While nervousness can be a factor, it is not definitive proof of illicit activity and can stem from various benign reasons, such as unfamiliarity with U.S. customs procedures or personal anxiety. Relying on this alone can lead to profiling and discriminatory practices, violating CBP's commitment to fair treatment and potentially contravening civil rights protections. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the traveler without further inquiry simply because they appear to be a tourist with no declared items of concern. This overlooks the possibility of sophisticated smuggling methods or the intent to engage in activities that violate U.S. laws, such as bringing in prohibited items for personal use or acting as a courier. A thorough, albeit brief inspection is necessary to confirm the absence of such risks, as mandated by CBP's mission to secure U.S. borders. A third incorrect approach is to conduct an overly intrusive and time-consuming search based on a vague suspicion, without any concrete indicators of risk. This can lead to significant delays for other travelers, inefficient use of CBP resources, and potential complaints from the traveler regarding their rights. Such an approach deviates from the risk-based assessment model, which aims to optimize inspection efforts by focusing on individuals and goods that present a higher probability of risk. Professional reasoning. A CBP officer should employ a tiered risk assessment framework. This involves initial observation and data analysis, followed by targeted questioning, and, if necessary, more intensive inspection. The officer must remain objective, relying on established protocols and observable facts. When faced with ambiguity, the decision should be to gather more information through professional questioning and observation, rather than making premature judgments or taking disproportionate actions. This ensures that the officer acts within legal and ethical boundaries, upholding the integrity of border security operations. Question 9. The control framework reveals that a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) officer stationed at a major port of entry in California is reviewing an incoming shipment of electronics. The importer is a well-established company with a history of compliant imports, and the shipping manifest appears to be in order. However, the officer has a general sense that the volume of this particular type of electronic component has been flagged in recent intelligence briefings as potentially being used in illicit activities. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach for the officer to employ in this situation? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the manifest, cross-referencing the importer and consignee information with CBP intelligence databases, and assess the shipment against known risk indicators for electronics, prioritizing further inspection if any anomalies are detected. Option B. Immediately flag the shipment for intensive physical inspection solely based on the general intelligence briefing about electronic components, without further detailed analysis of the specific shipment's data. Option C. Rely on a verbal assurance from the importer's agent that the shipment is legitimate and poses no security concerns, and proceed with immediate release. Option D. Expedite the clearance of the shipment due to the importer's established reputation and the seemingly compliant manifest, assuming no immediate threat. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the manifest, cross-referencing the importer and consignee information with CBP intelligence databases, and assess the shipment against known risk indicators for electronics, prioritizing further inspection if any anomalies are detected. Explanation: the control framework reveals that a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) officer's role in risk assessment is paramount to national security and trade facilitation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the officer to balance the imperative of efficient cargo movement with the critical need to identify and interdict illicit goods and potential threats. The officer must exercise sound judgment, relying on established protocols and intelligence, rather than succumbing to external pressures or personal biases. The best approach involves a thorough, systematic review of all available information, prioritizing intelligence-driven risk indicators, and adhering strictly to CBP directives and the Tariff Act of 1930, as amended. This includes scrutinizing manifest details, origin information, shipper and consignee data, and any alerts or flags associated with the shipment. The officer must then apply established risk assessment methodologies, which are designed to identify shipments that warrant further inspection based on a quantifiable probability of containing prohibited or restricted items or posing a security risk. This methodical, intelligence-led process is correct because it directly aligns with CBP's mission to secure U.S. borders while facilitating lawful trade, as mandated by federal law and CBP operational guidelines. It ensures that resources are deployed effectively to address the highest risks, an approach that relies solely on the perceived reputation of the importing company, without independent verification or consideration of specific shipment details, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge that even reputable companies can be unwitting conduits for illicit goods, or that circumstances can change. It bypasses the established risk assessment framework and could lead to the undetected entry of contraband or weapons. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to expedite the clearance of the shipment based on a vague assurance from the importer's agent that everything is in order. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to follow established procedures. It prioritizes speed over security and opens the door to potential violations of U.S. import laws and regulations. Finally, an approach that involves accepting a bribe or gratuity to overlook potential risks is a severe ethical and legal violation. This undermines the integrity of CBP operations, compromises national security, and is a direct contravention of federal law and CBP's strict ethical code. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to upholding the law and CBP's mission. Officers must be trained to recognize and resist undue influence, to critically evaluate all information presented, and to consistently apply risk assessment protocols. When in doubt, seeking guidance from supervisors or specialized units is a crucial step in ensuring compliance and maintaining operational integrity. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to refine the process for calculating the dutiable value of imported goods. A U.S. importer declares the price paid for a shipment of specialized electronic components from Germany as $50,000 USD. This price includes the cost of the components themselves, a $2,000 USD royalty payment to the patent holder for each shipment, and a $1,000 USD pre-importation shipping insurance fee. The importer also paid a $500 USD customs broker fee for services rendered in the U.S. after importation. Based on U.S. customs regulations, what is the correct dutiable value of the shipment? Option A, $53,000 USD. Option B, $50,000 USD. Option C, $52,000 USD. Option D, $51,500 USD. The correct answer is A, $53,000 USD. Explanation. Stakeholder feedback indicates a recurring challenge in accurately assessing the value of imported goods for duty assessment purposes, particularly when dealing with complex transactions involving multiple components and associated fees. This scenario is professionally challenging because a miscalculation can lead to significant financial penalties for the importer, underpayment of duties for the U.S. government, and potential delays in cargo release. A CBP officer must possess strong analytical skills and a thorough understanding of U.S. customs regulations to ensure fair and accurate duty collection. The best approach involves a meticulous calculation of the transaction value, adhering strictly to the principles outlined in the U.S. customs regulations. specifically 19 CFR Part 141, Subpart G, which governs the valuation of imported merchandise. This approach requires identifying all elements that constitute the price actually paid or payable, and adding any enumerated additions, such as assists, royalties, and selling commissions, that are not already included in the price. It also necessitates subtracting any elements that are not part of the value for duty purposes, such as certain post-importation costs or taxes rebated upon importation. This method ensures compliance with the primary valuation rule and upholds the integrity of the duty assessment process by accurately reflecting the true economic value of the imported goods. An incorrect approach would be to simply use the declared invoice price without scrutinizing the included or excluded costs. This fails to account for potential underdeclarations or misinterpretations of what constitutes value for duty purposes under U.S. law. Another incorrect approach is to estimate the value based on similar goods without a clear regulatory basis or supporting documentation, which introduces subjectivity and deviates from the established valuation methods. Finally, ignoring specific fees or charges that are legally considered part of the transaction value, such as certain freight or insurance costs incurred prior to importation, would also be a regulatory failure, leading to an inaccurate assessment. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with identifying the primary valuation method applicable, transaction value in most cases. They must then meticulously review all provided documentation, cross-referencing it with the U.S. Customs regulations to identify all includable and excludable costs. If any discrepancies or ambiguities arise, the officer should seek clarification from the importer or consult with CBP valuation specialists, rather than making assumptions or estimations. Question 11. System analysis indicates a shipment of electronics has arrived at a U.S. port of entry from a country known for manufacturing counterfeit goods. The manifest appears to be in order, and the importer has a generally good compliance history. What is the most prudent course of action for a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer to take to effectively assess the risk associated with this shipment? Option A. Immediately subject the entire shipment to a thorough physical examination due to the country of origin's known association with counterfeit goods. Option B. Perform a quick visual check of the exterior of the shipping containers for any obvious damage or irregularities. Option C. Rely primarily on the importer's generally good compliance history and allow the shipment to proceed with minimal inspection. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by cross-referencing the manifest with intelligence databases for high-risk commodities, examining the shipment for any observable anomalies or signs of tampering, and considering the importer's compliance history in conjunction with other risk factors. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by cross-referencing the manifest with intelligence databases for high-risk commodities, examining the shipment for any observable anomalies or signs of tampering, and considering the importer's compliance history in conjunction with other risk factors. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) officer due to the inherent tension between facilitating legitimate trade and preventing the illicit entry of prohibited items. The officer must exercise sound judgment to balance efficiency with thoroughness, recognizing that a hasty decision could have significant national security or economic consequences, while an overly cautious approach could impede lawful commerce. The volume of trade and the sophistication of smuggling methods necessitate a dynamic and informed risk assessment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted risk assessment that integrates intelligence, historical data, and observable indicators. This approach prioritizes the systematic evaluation of all available information to identify anomalies and potential threats. Specifically, it involves cross-referencing the manifest against known intelligence databases for high-risk commodities or origins, examining the physical characteristics of the shipment for any discrepancies or signs of tampering, and considering the importer's compliance history. This method aligns with CBP's mandate to secure U.S. borders while facilitating lawful trade by focusing resources on shipments that present the highest probability of risk, as outlined in CBP directives on risk management and targeting. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the importer's compliance history. While a good compliance record is a positive indicator, it does not guarantee future adherence to regulations. Smugglers can exploit this by using legitimate businesses as fronts, or a previously compliant importer might be coerced or unknowingly involved in illicit activities. This approach fails to account for evolving threats and the possibility of new or sophisticated smuggling techniques, potentially allowing prohibited items to pass undetected. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a cursory visual inspection of the shipment without considering other risk factors. This method is inefficient and prone to error. It overlooks the possibility of concealed contraband within seemingly legitimate goods or the use of sophisticated concealment methods that are not immediately apparent. This approach neglects the intelligence-driven aspect of border security, which is crucial for effective risk management, and deviates from CBP's operational guidelines that emphasize a layered approach to inspection. A third incorrect approach is to immediately escalate all shipments from countries with a history of illicit trade for intensive physical examination, regardless of other risk indicators. While country of origin is a factor in risk assessment, this blanket policy is inefficient and can overwhelm inspection resources. It fails to differentiate between shipments from those countries that are legitimate and those that may pose a higher risk, leading to unnecessary delays for compliant traders and diverting attention from potentially higher-risk shipments from other regions. This approach is not aligned with the principles of targeted risk management. Professional reasoning. CBP officers should employ a systematic, intelligence-led risk assessment framework. This involves gathering and analyzing all available data points, including manifest details, intelligence reports, importer history, and physical characteristics, to assign a risk score to each shipment. Decisions on inspection levels should be based on this comprehensive risk evaluation, ensuring that resources are deployed effectively to address the most significant threats while minimizing disruption to legitimate trade. This approach is grounded in CBP's strategic objectives of border security and trade facilitation. Question 12. The assessment process reveals a shipment of electronics arriving at a U.S. port of entry. The manifest lists standard components, and the importer has a generally clean history. However, the shipment's origin country is known for the production of certain controlled substances, and the declared value appears slightly below market rate for similar goods. Which approach best reflects a professional risk assessment by a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer? Option A. Dismiss the shipment as low risk because the manifest appears standard and the importer has a good record, despite the origin country and slightly undervalued declaration. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of all available intelligence, cargo manifests, importer history, and pre-arrival information to identify any anomalies or red flags that warrant closer examination. Option C. Immediately flag the shipment for intensive inspection solely based on its origin country, as this is a known production hub for controlled substances. Option D. Accept the manifest as accurate and allow the shipment to proceed without further scrutiny, prioritizing the speed of processing due to the importer's generally clean history. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of all available intelligence, cargo manifests, importer history, and pre-arrival information to identify any anomalies or red flags that warrant closer examination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) officer, because it requires balancing the imperative to facilitate legitimate trade with the equally critical duty to detect and interdict illicit goods. The officer must exercise keen judgment to identify subtle indicators of risk without unduly delaying lawful commerce, which is a core tenet of CBP's mission. The pressure to maintain efficiency while upholding security necessitates a nuanced approach to risk assessment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment that integrates multiple data points. This approach prioritizes a thorough review of all available intelligence, cargo manifests, importer history, and any pre-arrival information. It then uses this consolidated data to identify anomalies or red flags that warrant closer examination. This aligns with CBP's strategic goals of leveraging intelligence and data analytics to target high-risk shipments effectively, as outlined in various CBP directives and operational guidelines that emphasize a risk-based approach to border security and trade facilitation. This method ensures that resources are focused on the most probable threats while minimizing disruption to legitimate trade. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the perceived volume of a shipment as the primary indicator of risk. This is a superficial assessment that fails to account for the sophistication of illicit actors who may use small, high-value shipments for smuggling, neglects the intelligence-driven and data-informed risk assessment methodologies that CBP employs. Another flawed approach is to dismiss a shipment based on a single, minor discrepancy in the manifest without further investigation. While discrepancies can be errors, they can also be deliberate attempts to conceal prohibited items. A professional CBP officer must investigate such discrepancies to determine their nature and intent, rather than making an immediate, unsubstantiated judgment. A third unacceptable approach is to prioritize speed and efficiency above all else, leading to a cursory review of all shipments regardless of any potential risk indicators. This fundamentally undermines the security mission of CBP, as it creates a high probability of allowing illicit goods to enter the United States. It ignores the principle that risk assessment is a dynamic process that requires careful consideration of all available information. Professional reasoning. CBP officers should employ a systematic, multifaceted risk assessment process. This involves first gathering and analyzing all available pre-arrival and manifest data. Next, they should cross-reference this information with intelligence databases and importer risk profiles. Any identified anomalies or deviations from expected patterns should trigger further scrutiny. This iterative process allows for informed decision-making, ensuring that interventions are targeted, effective, and aligned with CBP's dual mission of security and trade facilitation. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals that a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) port of entry in California is experiencing delays in processing incoming cargo due to an overburdened inspection workforce. To optimize resource allocation and enhance border security, what risk assessment approach should be implemented to identify high-risk shipments for targeted inspection? Option A. Prioritize cargo inspections based on the perceived monetary value of the goods, inspecting higher-value shipments more frequently than lower-value ones. Option B. Limit cargo inspections to only those shipments that have been specifically flagged by an external complaint or tip received by CBP. Option C. Conduct random inspections of all incoming cargo, regardless of origin, type, or shipper information, to ensure a broad but unselective screening process. Option D. Implement a data-driven risk assessment system that analyzes pre-arrival information, historical data, and intelligence to flag shipments, with indicators of potential threats or violations for prioritized inspection. The correct answer is D. Implement a data-driven risk assessment system that analyzes pre-arrival information, historical data, and intelligence to flag shipments with indicators of potential threats or violations for prioritized inspection. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to refine the risk assessment process for incoming cargo at a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) port of entry. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative to facilitate legitimate trade with the critical responsibility of safeguarding national security and public health. Officers must make swift, informed decisions based on incomplete information, often under pressure, to identify potential threats without unduly delaying commerce. The effectiveness of the entire border security operation hinges on the accuracy and efficiency of these initial risk assessments. The best approach involves a multi-layered strategy that prioritizes intelligence-driven analysis and leverages available data to flag high-risk shipments for closer inspection. This method involves systematically reviewing pre-arrival manifests, cargo descriptions, shipper and consignee information, and historical data for anomalies or indicators of potential contraband, illicit activities, or violations of U.S. laws and regulations. It also includes utilizing advanced targeting systems and collaborating with other government agencies to gather and disseminate threat intelligence. This approach is correct because it aligns with CBP's core mission of securing the nation's borders while facilitating lawful trade, as mandated by various U.S. statutes and CBP directives that emphasize risk management and intelligence-led enforcement. It maximizes the efficient allocation of limited inspection resources by focusing on shipments that present the greatest potential risk. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on random inspections. This method is professionally unacceptable because it is inherently inefficient and ineffective. It fails to leverage any intelligence or risk factors, leading to a significant waste of resources on low-risk shipments, while potentially allowing high-risk cargo to pass undetected. This approach directly contradicts the principles of risk-based targeting that are fundamental to modern border security operations and would likely result in increased security vulnerabilities and trade delays. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize inspections based solely on the perceived value or volume of the shipment. This method is flawed because high-value or high-volume shipments are not necessarily indicative of higher risk. Focusing on these factors without considering other risk indicators can lead to overlooking smaller, yet more dangerous, shipments. This approach is ethically questionable as it could be perceived as favoring certain types of trade over others without a clear security rationale, and it fails to meet the regulatory requirement of a comprehensive risk assessment. A further incorrect approach is to conduct inspections only when a specific complaint or tip is received. While complaints are valuable, relying exclusively on them creates a reactive rather than proactive security posture. This method is professionally deficient because it leaves significant gaps in border security, allowing potential threats to enter the country until a complaint arises. It fails to meet CBP's mandate for continuous vigilance and risk mitigation, as outlined in its operational guidelines and strategic objectives. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to continuous learning and adaptation. Officers should be trained to critically evaluate all available data, understand the evolving threat landscape, and apply a systematic risk assessment methodology. This includes staying abreast of CBP directives, intelligence updates, and best practices in cargo screening. When faced with uncertainty, the professional decision is to err on the side of caution, ensuring that all potential risks are thoroughly investigated within the established operational framework, while always striving for efficiency and minimal disruption to legitimate trade. Question 14. The assessment process reveals a shipment arriving at a U.S. port of entry, declared as household goods from a country known for its robust manufacturing sector, but also for occasional instances of counterfeit goods. The accompanying manifest appears complete, and the importer has a history of compliant entries. What is the most prudent course of action for a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer to ensure compliance and national security? Option A. Accept the shipper's declaration at face value and allow the shipment to proceed, given the importer's history of compliant entries and the seemingly complete manifest. Option B. Release the shipment without further scrutiny, assuming that previous compliant entries indicate a continued pattern of legitimate trade. Option C. Immediately detain the shipment for secondary inspection solely based on the country of origin, without any specific indicators of risk in the manifest or the nature of the goods. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of all accompanying documentation. Cross-reference the declared contents against known risk factors for the origin country and commodity type, and perform a physical inspection of the cargo to verify its contents and condition. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of all accompanying documentation. Cross-reference the declared contents against known risk factors for the origin country and commodity type, and perform a physical inspection of the cargo to verify its contents and condition. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of facilitating legitimate trade with the critical duty of preventing the illicit entry of prohibited items. The officer must make a swift, informed decision based on limited information, where a wrong choice could have significant consequences for national security, public safety, and international commerce. The pressure to maintain efficiency at the border adds another layer of complexity, demanding a judgment call that is both thorough and timely. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic approach that prioritizes thoroughness and adherence to established protocols. This means meticulously examining all available documentation, cross-referencing information against known risk indicators, and conducting a physical inspection of the cargo. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the core mandate of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, as outlined in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Field Manual and relevant statutes such as the Tariff Act of 1930, as amended. These regulations emphasize the need for diligent inspection and verification to identify and interdict contraband, undeclared goods, and items that pose a security risk. By conducting a comprehensive review and physical inspection, the officer ensures that all potential risks are assessed according to established procedures, thereby upholding the agency's mission. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the shipper's declaration without further verification. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the fundamental principle of CBP's role, which is to verify the accuracy of declarations. Such an approach would fail to detect discrepancies or deliberate misrepresentations, potentially allowing prohibited items to enter the United States, thereby violating CBP's security and revenue collection responsibilities. Another incorrect approach is to immediately flag the shipment for secondary inspection based solely on the origin country, without any specific risk indicators present in the documentation or the nature of the goods. While origin can be a factor in risk assessment, it should not be the sole determinant for escalation without corroborating evidence. This approach is inefficient and can lead to unnecessary delays for legitimate trade, undermining the goal of facilitating commerce and potentially straining resources. It deviates from a risk-based assessment that requires specific triggers. A third incorrect approach is to assume the shipment is legitimate because it has been imported previously without incident. Past compliance does not guarantee future compliance. This approach is flawed as it relies on a presumption of innocence that is not sufficient for border security. CBP's mandate requires ongoing vigilance and assessment of current shipments, as circumstances and intentions can change. This failure to reevaluate each shipment independently is a significant lapse in professional duty and regulatory compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the mission and regulatory requirements. This involves actively seeking and analyzing all available data, identifying potential risk factors, and applying established protocols for verification and inspection. When faced with uncertainty, the professional should err on the side of caution and thoroughness, utilizing available resources and expertise to make an informed decision. This process ensures accountability, upholds legal and ethical obligations, and contributes to the overall effectiveness of border security operations. Question 15. The assessment process reveals a commercial shipment arriving at a U.S. port of entry, declared as agricultural equipment. The traveler exhibits subtle signs of nervousness, and the manifest lists a specific type of equipment known to be susceptible to concealment of prohibited items. Considering the U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) operational framework for risk assessment, which of the following actions best represents a professional and effective response? Option A. Immediately detain the entire shipment for a comprehensive, item-by-item search due to the traveler's nervousness. Option B. Allow the shipment to proceed without further inspection, as the declaration appears to be for legitimate agricultural equipment. Option C. Conduct a targeted physical inspection of the declared agricultural equipment, focusing on areas known for concealment, and cross-reference the manifest details with the physical items observed. Option D. Initiate a secondary inspection solely based on the origin of the equipment, without further corroborating evidence. The correct answer is C. Conduct a targeted physical inspection of the declared agricultural equipment, focusing on areas known for concealment, and cross-reference the manifest details with the physical items observed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of facilitating legitimate trade with the critical duty of identifying and interdicting illicit goods. The officer must make a swift, informed decision based on limited information, where a wrong judgment could lead to either a security breach or unnecessary delay and economic impact. The officer's training in risk assessment and knowledge of U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) directives are paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a systematic risk assessment that prioritizes the traveler's declared goods against known intelligence and behavioral indicators, while also considering the nature of the goods themselves. This approach aligns with CBP's mission to secure U.S. borders while facilitating lawful trade. Specifically, it involves cross-referencing the declared manifest with the physical inspection, looking for discrepancies, and utilizing available intelligence on high-risk commodities or routes. This methodical process ensures that resources are focused on potential threats without unduly impeding legitimate commerce, adhering to CBP's operational guidelines for risk management. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately escalate the inspection solely based on the origin of the goods, without further corroborating evidence. This is a failure because it relies on a broad generalization rather than specific risk factors, potentially leading to unnecessary delays for legitimate shipments and misallocation of inspection resources. CBP's risk assessment framework emphasizes specific indicators, not just geographical origin. Another incorrect approach is to accept the declaration at face value and allow the shipment to proceed without any further scrutiny, despite the presence of potentially concerning behavioral indicators or the nature of the goods. This approach fails to uphold CBP's responsibility to identify and interdict contraband and violations of U.S. law, as it bypasses established risk assessment protocols designed to detect threats. A third incorrect approach is to conduct an overly intrusive and time-consuming inspection of every item in the shipment without a clear, articulable basis for suspicion beyond the initial observation. This is inefficient and counterproductive, as it can significantly disrupt trade and strain inspection resources, deviating from the principle of targeted risk assessment. Professional reasoning. A CBP officer should employ a tiered risk assessment strategy. This begins with evaluating the declared information against intelligence and known risk profiles. If initial indicators suggest a higher risk, the officer should then proceed to a more targeted physical examination, focusing on specific items or discrepancies identified during the initial assessment. This approach ensures that resources are used effectively and efficiently, prioritizing the most significant threats while facilitating the flow of legitimate trade in accordance with CBP directives. Question 16. Analysis of a shipment of electronics arriving at a U.S. port of entry reveals a minor discrepancy in the declared quantity of a specific component on the manifest compared to the invoice. The manifest lists 1,000 units, while the invoice shows 1,050 units. The shipment is from a country known for producing counterfeit goods, but the importer has a generally good compliance history. What is the most appropriate course of action for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Officer to take? Option A. Release the shipment without further inspection, assuming the discrepancy is a minor clerical error given the importer's good history. Option B. Immediately detain the entire shipment for a full secondary inspection due to the discrepancy and the origin country's reputation. Option C. Contact the importer directly to request clarification on the discrepancy before any physical inspection is performed. Option D. Conduct a targeted physical inspection of the shipment, focusing on verifying the quantity and authenticity of the specific component in question, while also reviewing other documentation for further anomalies. The correct answer is D. Conduct a targeted physical inspection of the shipment, focusing on verifying the quantity and authenticity of the specific component in question, while also reviewing other documentation for further anomalies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) officer, because it requires balancing the imperative to facilitate legitimate trade with the equally critical duty to identify and interdict illicit goods. The officer must make a swift, informed decision based on limited information, where a wrong choice could lead to either the entry of contraband or unnecessary delays and potential damage to legitimate commerce. The pressure to maintain efficiency at a busy port of entry adds to the complexity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic approach that prioritizes risk assessment based on observable indicators and established intelligence. This begins with a thorough review of all available documentation, cross-referencing information for inconsistencies. The officer should then conduct a physical inspection of the cargo, focusing on the specific areas of concern identified during the documentation review and any anomalies observed during the initial visual assessment. This methodical approach, grounded in CBP's risk management principles and directives, ensures that resources are deployed effectively to investigate potential threats while minimizing disruption to lawful trade. The officer's actions are guided by the Customs Modernization Act and CBP's internal operational guidelines, which mandate a risk-based approach to inspections. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately escalate the situation for a full, intrusive secondary inspection based solely on a vague suspicion, without further preliminary investigation. This is professionally unacceptable because it deviates from the risk-based assessment framework, potentially wasting valuable resources and causing undue delays for legitimate shipments. It fails to leverage the initial screening process effectively and can lead to a perception of arbitrary enforcement. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the shipment based on a minor, easily explainable discrepancy in the paperwork without conducting any physical verification. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses the fundamental requirement to verify the declared contents against the actual goods. Such an approach could allow prohibited or restricted items to enter the United States, violating CBP's mission to protect national security and economic interests. It demonstrates a failure to adhere to the principle of due diligence in cargo inspection. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the shipper's reputation or the importer's perceived trustworthiness without independently verifying the cargo. While reputation can be a factor in risk assessment, it is not a substitute for physical inspection or thorough documentation review. This approach is professionally unacceptable because it creates a vulnerability to sophisticated smuggling operations that might exploit trusted relationships. It neglects the core CBP responsibility to independently assess and mitigate risks associated with every shipment. Professional reasoning. A CBP officer should employ a tiered risk assessment strategy. This involves initial documentary analysis, followed by a targeted physical inspection, if warranted by the documentary review or other intelligence. The officer must remain objective, relying on observable facts and established protocols rather than assumptions or gut feelings alone. When in doubt, consulting with supervisors or specialized units is a crucial part of the decision-making process to ensure compliance with regulations and best practices. Question 17. The review process indicates that a CBP officer at the Port of Los Angeles is tasked with managing the flow of goods and identifying potential security risks. The officer has a shipment of electronics declared as consumer goods from a new importer with no prior CBP compliance history. The manifest appears complete, but the declared value seems unusually low for the quantity and type of goods. Which of the following approaches best reflects a risk-based strategy for this scenario under U.S. Customs regulations? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the manifest and supporting documentation, cross-reference the declared value against industry benchmarks, and consider a targeted physical inspection based on the low declared value and new importer status. Option B. Allow the shipment to proceed without further inspection, assuming the manifest is complete and the importer is new, thus facilitating trade. Option C. Prioritize immediate physical inspection of the shipment due to the high volume of electronics typically imported, regardless of other factors. Option D. Focus inspection efforts on shipments of items that are more commonly associated with contraband, such as textiles or agricultural products, and give this electronics shipment lower priority. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the manifest and supporting documentation, cross-reference the declared value against industry benchmarks, and consider a targeted physical inspection based on the low declared value and new importer status. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where a CBP officer must balance the imperative of facilitating legitimate trade with the critical need to identify and interdict illicit goods and activities. This is professionally challenging because it requires nuanced judgment, an understanding of risk indicators, and the ability to act decisively without unduly impeding commerce. The officer must consider multiple factors, including the nature of the goods, the importer's history, and intelligence, to make informed decisions about inspection levels. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes resources towards shipments exhibiting higher probabilities of non-compliance. This means leveraging available intelligence, historical data on the importer and commodity, and observable discrepancies in documentation or cargo presentation. This approach is correct because it aligns with CBP's mandate to secure U.S. borders while facilitating lawful trade, as outlined in the Tariff Act of 1930, as amended, and CBP's operational directives on risk management. It ensures that inspection efforts are targeted and efficient, maximizing the chances of detecting threats while minimizing delays for legitimate businesses. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the volume of trade to determine inspection levels. This is flawed because high-volume trade does not inherently equate to low risk. It can also represent a larger potential avenue for illicit activities. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize inspections based on the perceived inconvenience of the commodity to the public, such as consumer electronics. While consumer goods are important, risk assessment must be based on intelligence and indicators of potential violations, not subjective notions of public inconvenience. Finally, an approach that focuses exclusively on the importer's stated intent for the goods, without independent verification or consideration of other risk factors, is insufficient. This overlooks the possibility of misrepresentation or illicit diversion. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with gathering all available information, including manifest details, importer profiles, and any relevant intelligence. They should then apply established risk assessment criteria to evaluate the likelihood of noncompliance. This involves considering factors such as the commodity type, country of origin, importer's compliance history, and any anomalies in the documentation or physical appearance of the shipment. Based on this comprehensive assessment, the officer can then determine the appropriate level of inspection, ranging from document review to intensive physical examination. Question 18. Performance analysis shows that a significant portion of illicit goods are interdicted through proactive risk assessment of incoming shipments at U.S. ports of entry. A CBP officer is reviewing an import declaration for a shipment of textiles from China. The manifest lists a large quantity of cotton shirts. The importer has a history of timely filings and no prior violations. However, the declared value appears slightly below market average for similar goods. Considering the operational directives of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which of the following approaches best aligns with effective risk assessment principles for this scenario? Option A. Immediately flag the shipment for a full physical inspection due to the large volume of goods, irrespective of other factors. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the manifest details, cross-referencing the declared value against available market data and considering the importer's compliance history to determine the appropriate level of inspection. Option C. Focus solely on the declared value being slightly below market average and initiate a detailed investigation based on this single indicator. Option D. Process the shipment quickly to facilitate trade, assuming the importer's good reputation guarantees compliance. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the manifest details, cross-referencing the declared value against available market data and considering the importer's compliance history to determine the appropriate level of inspection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a CBP officer to balance the mandate of facilitating legitimate trade with the imperative to detect and interdict illicit goods. The officer must make a swift, informed decision based on limited information, where a wrong choice could lead to either a security breach or unnecessary delays and economic impact. The pressure to maintain efficiency while upholding national security necessitates a robust risk assessment framework. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic evaluation of all available data points to identify anomalies and indicators of potential risk. This includes scrutinizing the manifest against known high-risk commodities, reviewing the importer's compliance history, and considering any intelligence or alerts associated with the shipment or the parties involved. This method aligns directly with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's (CBP) strategic objective of leveraging intelligence and risk management to target enforcement efforts effectively, as outlined in CBP's operational directives and training materials. It prioritizes a data-driven, intelligence-led approach to identify high-risk shipments for further inspection, thereby optimizing resource allocation and maximizing the chances of interdiction without unduly hindering lawful commerce. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the volume of the shipment without considering other risk factors is an inadequate approach. Large shipments can sometimes be used to conceal illicit goods. Volume alone is not a definitive indicator of risk and can lead to the unnecessary scrutiny of legitimate high-volume trade, impacting efficiency. Relying exclusively on the importer's perceived reputation without verifying current compliance data is also flawed. A previously reputable importer can experience changes in their operations or engage in new, illicit activities. A thorough risk assessment requires up-to-date information and cannot be based on outdated perceptions. Prioritizing speed of processing above all else, even when suspicious indicators are present, directly contravenes CBP's mission to secure U.S. borders. This approach would significantly increase the risk of allowing prohibited or dangerous goods to enter the country, undermining national security and public safety. Professional reasoning. CBP officers should employ a layered risk assessment strategy. This involves initial screening of all cargo against established risk criteria, followed by a deeper dive into shipments flagged by the system or exhibiting suspicious characteristics. This process should integrate intelligence, historical data, and real-time information to make informed decisions about inspection levels. The goal is to maximize the probability of detecting threats while minimizing the impact on legitimate trade. Question 19. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent increase in flagged instances of undeclared high-value jewelry being processed through the Port of New York/Newark. As a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer, what is the most effective and compliant approach to address this developing trend? Option A. Analyze the flagged data to identify specific risk factors associated with the undeclared jewelry, such as common origins, declared values, or traveler profiles, and adjust inspection protocols to target these identified risks. Option B. Focus solely on increasing the fines and penalties for any undeclared jewelry discovered during routine inspections, without altering the inspection process itself. Option C. Disregard the flagged data as potentially erroneous and continue with standard inspection procedures for all arrivals. Option D. Immediately implement a 100% inspection rate for all travelers and cargo arriving at the Port of New York/Newark to ensure no undeclared items are missed. The correct answer is A. Analyze the flagged data to identify specific risk factors associated with the undeclared jewelry, such as common origins, declared values, or traveler profiles, and adjust inspection protocols to target these identified risks. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of increased undeclared high-value goods being flagged as specific port of entry into the United States. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a CBP officer to balance the imperative of facilitating legitimate trade with the critical responsibility of preventing the illicit movement of goods and revenue loss to the U.S. Treasury. A nuanced approach is necessary to avoid both overburdening compliant travelers and missing significant violations. The best professional approach involves a systematic and evidence-based risk assessment. This means analyzing the flagged data to identify specific trends, such as the type of goods, the declared values, the origin of shipments, and the traveler profiles associated with these flags. Based on this analysis, the officer should then develop targeted inspection strategies. This might include increasing scrutiny on specific types of goods or travelers exhibiting certain risk factors, while allowing low-risk travelers and goods to proceed with minimal delay. This approach is correct because it aligns with CBP's mission to secure U.S. borders and facilitate lawful trade by optimizing resource allocation and focusing enforcement efforts where they are most likely to be effective, thereby adhering to the principles of risk management and operational efficiency mandated by CBP directives. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a blanket, heightened inspection protocol for all travelers and goods arriving at that port of entry. This is professionally unacceptable because it is an inefficient use of resources, creates unnecessary delays for legitimate travelers and businesses, and does not target the actual source of the problem. It fails to leverage the intelligence provided by the monitoring system and instead resorts to a broad, indiscriminate measure. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the monitoring system's findings as mere statistical anomalies without further investigation. This is professionally unacceptable as it disregards valuable intelligence that could indicate a systemic issue or emerging threat. It represents a failure to proactively identify and address potential violations, thereby undermining CBP's enforcement responsibilities and potentially allowing significant revenue loss or the entry of prohibited items. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on increasing penalties for any undeclared goods discovered, without adjusting inspection strategies. While penalties are a deterrent, this approach fails to address the root cause of the increased undeclared goods. It is reactive rather than proactive and does not leverage the risk assessment capabilities of the monitoring system to prevent violations before they occur. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a continuous cycle of intelligence gathering, analysis, strategy development, implementation, and evaluation. Officers must first understand the available data and intelligence, then critically analyze it to identify patterns and potential risks. Based on this analysis, they should develop targeted and proportionate enforcement strategies. Finally, they must continuously evaluate the effectiveness of these strategies and adapt them as necessary to maintain border security and facilitate lawful trade. Question 20. Investigation of a shipment of electronics arriving at the port of Los Angeles, California, reveals a discrepancy between the declared contents and the weight of the container. The declared manifest lists 500 units of consumer-grade smartphones, with a total declared value of $250,000. However, a preliminary weight calculation based on the manifest suggests the container should weigh approximately 20,000 pounds, but the actual scale reading is 22,500 pounds. If the average weight of a declared smartphone unit is 0.75 pounds, and the average weight of a unit of a high-density, illicit synthetic drug is 1.5 pounds, what is the minimum number of illicit drug units that would need to be concealed within the shipment to account for the excess weight, assuming no other discrepancies? Option A, 2,000 units. Option B, 1,500 units. Option C, 1,667 units. Option D, 1,000 units. The correct answer is C, 1,667 units. Explanation: investigation of potential smuggling activities at a U.S. port of entry presents a significant professional challenge for CBP officers. The core difficulty lies in balancing the imperative to secure the border and prevent illicit trade with the need for efficient and fair processing of legitimate commerce and travelers. This requires a nuanced approach to risk assessment, where officers must interpret subtle indicators and make rapid, informed decisions under pressure. The ethical and legal mandate is to identify and interdict threats while minimizing disruption to lawful trade and travel, adhering strictly to U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) directives and relevant U.S. statutes. The best approach involves a systematic, data-driven risk assessment that prioritizes resources and intelligence. This means leveraging all available information, including intelligence reports, traveler manifests, cargo declarations, and behavioral indicators, to identify high-risk shipments or individuals. For instance, if intelligence suggests a particular type of contraband is being moved via a specific shipping route, an officer would focus their scrutiny on shipments matching that profile. This aligns with CBP's strategic goal of smart border operation, which emphasizes using technology and intelligence to target threats effectively. The regulatory framework supports this by empowering officers to conduct inspections based on reasonable suspicion, which is informed by risk assessment. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on random inspections without considering any risk factors. This is inefficient and fails to leverage the intelligence and data available to CBP, thereby increasing the likelihood of missing high-risk shipments while unnecessarily delaying low-risk ones. It also deviates from the principle of targeted enforcement, which is a cornerstone of effective border security. Another incorrect approach is to base decisions solely on the perceived ethnicity or nationality of a traveler or the origin of a shipment, without any corroborating risk indicators. This is not only professionally unsound, but also ethically and legally problematic, as it can lead to discriminatory profiling, which is contrary to CBP's commitment to fair and impartial enforcement. Such practices undermine public trust and can lead to legal challenges. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of processing over thoroughness, even when risk indicators are present, is also unacceptable. While efficiency is important, it must not come at the expense of security. Officers must be trained to recognize when a situation warrants further investigation, regardless of potential delays. A professional decision-making process for CBP officers in risk assessment should involve a continuous cycle of information gathering, analysis, and action. This includes 1. Understanding the current threat landscape and intelligence priorities. 2. Utilizing all available tools and data to assess the risk associated with each traveler or shipment. 3. Applying established inspection criteria and protocols. 4. Documenting findings and decisions. 5. Continuously learning and adapting based on outcomes and new intelligence.